This budget is the budget of a puppet government who are doing what they have been told to do by the IMF, the EU Commission and the European Central Bank. They're doing so that the state can draw down the bailout funds now that the country is insolvent. This budget is, in an ironic way, a fitting tribute to this failed administration. Fianna Fáil, like the Bourbons, have learned nothing and forgotten nothing, and they are destined to continue their mistakes in this, their last budget. These mistakes are easily recorded, but their consequences are tragic. The government's policies have wrecked the economy, they have destroyed the confidence of the people, they've put 450,000 people out of work, they've forced over 100,000 of our adult children to immigrate, they've increased poverty, and they have undermined any concept of social justice in our society. The government has made three major mistakes, and they continue to make them today. The two harsh budgets which were introduced to correct the fiscal crisis were incoherent in policy and undermined their own objectives. The government never learned that one cannot cut and tax one's way out of a recession. One can only grow out of a recession. Consequently, their slash and burn policies were counterproductive, and they failed to include measures to grow the economy and to protect and create jobs. You've fallen into the same trap today, Minister. Not a single progressive idea to support job creation or to get our economy growing again. On fiscal correction, the intentions of Brian Lenihan, the Minister for Finance, were sound, but his policies were woefully misguided. So the more he did, the worse it got. Then, some months ago, the country became insolvent, or to put it very bluntly, we went burst. The misguided budgetary policy would not on its own, however, have destroyed the country. The destruction of the country is due to the fatal banking policy. Think of the hubris of a small country guaranteeing 450 billion of funds. Think of the decision to bail out Anglo-Irish Bank at a cost of 32 billion to the taxpayer, and think of the extraordinary imprudence of NAMA. Think of the failure of regulation. Think of the childlike belief that the banks were telling you the truth. Think of the failure to hold anybody to account. Think of the decision to keep the directors of banks in place, the decision to recruit new management from the second tier of existing management. Think of the failure in the third year of investigation to forward a single file to the DPP. Think of the fatal ignoring of the principle of moral hazard, so that although shareholders were wiped out and those who borrowed recklessly were punished, those who lent recklessly were not punished but had their losses underpinned by the taxpayer. How could anyone have confidence in an Irish banking system underpinned by this set of policies promoted by you, Minister, and your colleagues in government? The financial problems of the sovereign state were difficult, but the financial problems of the sovereign state were manageable. When, however, bank debt became national debt, the position became unsustainable. The current budget deficit has shot up to 32% of GDP, and the government can no longer borrow. That's why you're out of the bond market, because if you went in, you couldn't borrow any longer. Ireland has become insolvent, and that's why we have to be rescued by Europe and the IMF. Now, in case anybody on the front benches or the back benches that thinks that this happened by accident, it didn't. It's a direct result of your banking policies, which we pointed out to you when you promoted them in the House, would not work. We pointed them out to you that they were going to cause extra trouble, and they have caused it now, and that's where we find ourselves where we are. I wonder, do members of the government ever feel ashamed? I felt ashamed when I read the obsequious letters of the Minister for Finance when applying for assistance to Messrs. Juncker, Reynolds, Wren and Trichet, and separately to Mr. Strauss-Kahn of the IMF. The first sentence in both your letters, Minister, reads as follows: Ireland faces an economic crisis without parallel in its recent history. The problems of low growth, doubt about fiscal sustainability, and a fragile banking sector are now feeding on each other, undermining confidence. What a self-indictment. Your critics couldn't have put it better. An absolute indictment of your own policies in both of the letters which you wrote to our new masters in Europe and in Washington.
Hear, hear.
You know, if it wasn't so serious, it would be kind of funny, because when you read the letters, they sound like confessions beaten out of you, that you're reading a thriller. It's like as if they waterboarded you on Merrion Street and made you sign the letters. Or maybe they were motivated by a kind of mock humility of the Gambine culture to think that you'd get the 85 billion more easily. There was a hand out. Is this a hit me now with the child of my arms and fingers?
You can't try that anymore, I tell you.
Noonan, without interruption.
The third and biggest mistake of the government is to think that the purpose of all the pain and suffering is to restore Ireland to where it was in Bertie Ahern's time. The dream of restoring a last Camelot is always a huge mistake. Bertie Ahern's Ireland is dead and gone, and it will never be restored. The Galway tent is gone. The fast trips to Florida are gone. The subsidised travel out of the SIP2 Flush Fund is gone. The flipping.
Deputy Gogarty, you will allow members to address this House without interfering.
The flipping of property in the fashionable pubs of Dublin after work on a Friday will not happen again. The bubble cannot be reinflated, and the government policy designed to restore lost times cannot succeed. We need a new Ireland, a lean and more generous Ireland, where we support strong families and strong communities, where volunteerism is again honoured, and where people work hard and are rewarded for their hard work. We need to reform the political system, and a talented, fit-for-purpose public service needs to be developed once more. We need new policies to support growth and jobs, and this is a fatal flaw in this budget. There's nothing there to get that economy growing again. And you'll recall, Minister, even though your 4-year plan published 2 weeks ago is based on a growth rate in 2011 of 1.755%, on the 29th of November, the European Commission marked that down to 0.9%. Your figures won't reach target unless you get growth in the economy. You've been advised of that by the European Commission, and you're still persisting in proceeding without any growth or jobs strategy. We need a fair and just society where the test of any policy is the answer to 2 very simple questions. Is it a fair policy, and does it protect the most vulnerable in society? It is against those objectives that I intend to measure this budget. The Minister was very sparse in his detail today. You know, 2 minutes before you sat down, we got a resume of the main features of the budget. So it's difficult to know very quickly, when you don't read out the major detail of the budget, what exactly the full implications are. But if we take the public expenditure area first, of the 6 billion in correction to which you're committed, 4 billion of that is in public expenditure cuts, and 2 billion then is in taxation. Now, it's very difficult to know what the expenditure cuts are in these documents presented. But we had an experience in the olden days when Mr. Haughey was king of the country, when a budget was presented and we came into government and we found the figures didn't add up, and more importantly, there were no policy decisions taken to underpin the expenditure cuts. Now, Taoiseach, you'll be in here tomorrow. I want you to state clearly what the policy decisions are which underpin the expenditure cuts which you have registered in the tables at the back here. I hope you're not faking it up, but I want you to come out and explain what the expenditure cuts are. I notice, Minister, that in the Green Book, the 4-year plan, there's a figure of the sale of state assets at 700 million euros. And I notice in the tables at the back here today that figure is rounded off to 660 million euros. There wasn't one reference to that in your speech. Now, I'm told that comes from your intention to sell Bord Gáis, that you have permission from the European Commission to pay this into the Exchequer by way of dividend, and yet you're totally silent on it in your checks today. Now, when I see things like that, I worry about the accuracy of your figures. You made no reference to reduction in capital spending today. Yet, a quick look at the tables at the back would suggest you're taking about 1.8 billion out in capital spending. You haven't nominated the key projects in those cutbacks. Is Metro North proceeding, for example? What are the heavy hits? What are the heavy hits?
Kennedy,
what are the heavy? You'll be walking home, you'll have no metro. You walk at the swords, you will. Walk at the swords, you will.
Allow Deputy Noonan to make his contribution.
So since 2/3 of the adjustment to get to 6 billion derives from public expenditure cuts, I believe there's an onus on the government, and since the Minister for Finance didn't do it, the Taoiseach could come into the House tomorrow morning and spell out the policy decisions which are taken, which underpin expenditure cuts up to 4 billion euro, because the Finance Minister has not done it today. Your income tax adjustments are equally puzzling. While you say you're going to cut the tax credit by 10%, and that's fairly obvious, your universal social charge is still a bit of a mystery. The universal social charge will, as those with a long memory recall, that last year the Minister announced his intention to put the health levy, the PRSI and the income levy together, and this would be a one universal social charge. When questioned in the budget debates, if I recall correctly, the Minister said that the tax neutral position for this charge would be 7.5%. And while it would be tax neutral in the sense that it would collect the same amount of revenue, but obviously it would have a distributional effect, where it would be harder on poorer people and less onerous on wealthy people. Now, when I was preparing the alternative budget proposals in the last couple of weeks, which we announced on Friday, we ran the proposal by the Department of Finance, who do an independent costing, of these proposals. The Department of Finance were of the view that the tax-neutral position was now in excess of 9%, and that if one wanted to collect extra income, one would have to go beyond that. Now, curiously, in your speech today, while you talked about introducing the universal social charge, you never nominated the rate at which it was being introduced. Now, that is not fair, Minister. When you present a budget, you need to be transparent. And you cannot fool the people by announcing a universal social charge and not nominating in your speech the rate at which it will apply. Now, the second issue is back in the small print. It wasn't in the speech. Now, in the charge, in the rate that Deputy Gogarty has pointed out to me, is in the appendix. Is it the intent to be revenue neutral, or is it the intent to collect extra revenue from the universal social charge? That is a very important policy pronouncement which you should have made in your speech, and you didn't. So there's a lot of things not clear in this budget. A lot of things not clear in this budget.
If you can't be silent, please.
I notice as well
is able to make his presentation without your assistance.
I notice as well, Minister, on your income tax provision, you don't have a high regard for carers, because the tax credit for carers is down from 900 to 810. And on top of that, you've cut the carers allowance. You didn't exempt it like the old age pension. You've cut the carers allowance as well as cutting it.